I think I speak for everyone when I say that the most enjoyable part of Realm is running 30 straight sprite worlds, snake pits, and UDLs every time you need to max a character. What's that? Oh, it's just me? Huh. Well, if you're one of the people who found that boring and monotonous, Deca agreed with you and implemented a new feature, Dungeon Modifiers. Modifiers are intended to give dungeons some variability to keep it more interesting when you're running them over and over. Dungeons dropped by enemies have a random chance of having modifiers applied, while players with keys can spend additional realm gold to add modifiers to the key. Dungeons can now have different grades, starting from D and increasing to C, B, A, and finally S, which essentially indicate how strong the modifiers are. Note that not all dungeons will have modifiers. A decent number of realm drops will be unmodded and will not show a grade at all. The dungeons in the game are broken into 4 categories based on difficulty, as shown here. In general, more difficult dungeons are more likely to be modded. This table shows the chances of a dungeon dropped in the realm to be each of the grades. You can check the modifiers of a dungeon before you go in by looking in the bottom right while standing on the portal. You can also check them while in the dungeon if you press and hold K, and they'll show up in the top left. Some modifiers are positive, while others are negative. For example, one potential negative modifier on a grade S dungeon makes bosses have 45% more HP, while a positive modifier makes bosses have 45% less HP. It's impossible to have a dungeon with all positive or all negative mods. Grade D dungeons will always have 1 of each, and grade S dungeons will always have 2 of each. Grade A through C will always have 3 total modifiers, with 2 positive and 1 negative, or vice versa. Many of the modifiers have a corresponding positive and negative, like the example mentioned before with boss HP. These corresponding positive and negative mods could apply to things like boss or minion, HP, damage, XP, or defense. Minions can also have mods on their rate of fire, projectile speed, and projectile lifetime. There are a lot of modifiers that are more interesting than just a increase or decrease this stat by X%. You can find a full list on Realmeye or the blog posts that are linked in the description, but I'm going to run through many of the more consequential ones. We're going to start out with Bis. Bis gives a chance for the boss to drop a portal to the same dungeon, making it possible to chain a dungeon from the realm. Chef gives the boss a chance of dropping a food item, with the feed power of the item increasing for more difficult dungeons. Void and MBC give the highest feed power item, which is a double cheeseburger deluxe at 3500 feed power. Exaltation dungeons can have an Exalted Banner mod, which gives a chance of essentially spawning a chest at the end of the dungeon that counts as an additional complete and gives additional exaltation progress. Found Treasure reveals any tea rooms on the map when you first enter the dungeon. Note that it's still possible that there are no tea rooms even if this mod is present though. This is especially useful in dungeons that can have a lot of tea rooms, like Davy for example. Generous gives all bosses a small chance to drop a quest chest. The chest given depends on which quest pool the dungeon is part of. For example, the Void would drop a Void quest chest, while a Snake Pit would drop a standard quest chest. Noble Boss causes the boss to drop a portal to the Court of Oryx, making it possible to run the court dungeons without skipping Oryx or buying keys. Heroic Regeneration is a mod that causes minions to drop Heroic Orbs. Heroic Orbs were first introduced with the Heroic Abyss and Heroic UDL, and when you walk over them they'll give you either healing or energized. Pet Collector gives the boss a chance to drop a pet egg, with the highest tier of dungeons dropping rare pet eggs. Skin Hunter increases the drop rate of pet and character skins both. Souvenir gives an additional drop chance for the iconic reward from the dungeon. Usually the iconic reward is one of the white bags. For example, the souvenir in the Void is the Omni, and an MBC is a Colo Sword. When you get a drop from Souvenir, it'll drop in a white bag separate from whatever bag the boss actually dropped you. There are also some modifiers that spawn an additional enemy to fight after defeating the boss. The Key Fairy is an enemy that doesn't shoot, but when you kill it, it will drop a mystery key to one player that hits soulbound. The mystery key will be the same tier as the dungeon that dropped it, so for example, if you're in an Exaltation dungeon, it'll drop a legendary mystery key. Dimitis is an additional enemy that does fight back. As long as you're level 20, you shouldn't have too much trouble with him, as his shots are pretty easy to dodge. He has a lot of HP, so it might take you a while to kill him if you have low tier gear, but he has a chance of dropping some pretty useful stuff, like backpacks, loot drop potions, wine cellar incantations, mystery keys, and potions of max level. Most commonly though, he'll just give you a clothing dye or a mystery stat pot. The Prismimic is another enemy that fights back. This has appeared in other events in the past, but if you're unaware, it's essentially a boss rush where the enemy morphs into other bosses and has their attacks. It's a nice throwback to some of the pre-reconstruction bosses. The most dangerous enemy by far that can spawn as a result of dungeon modifiers is the Wanderer. Unlike Dimitis and the Prismimic, the difficulty of the Wanderer depends on the difficulty of the dungeon. Mid-tier dungeon wanderers can drop wine cellar tops, with Exaltation dungeon wanderers dropping coveted T13 weapons. Stay on your toes, he has a lot of unpredictable attacks that can easily kill a maxed character if you're not careful. The last group of modifiers I want to mention are a few that are unique to specific dungeons. Ocean Trench has Alexander's Legacy, which gives an increased chance of a dying Thessal, giving more drops. If you have the max level of Alexander's Legacy, it actually guarantees dying Thessal. Deadwater Docks has the Crab Rave, which replaces the Calamity Crab with multiple smaller crabs. This is a great way to get extra speed or dex potions. One of the scarier modifiers is the Haunted Halls and the Lost Halls. This gives an increased chance of Spooky Boy spawning in each room, and it makes seeing multiple Spookies way more likely. Lastly, Shatters has the Lingering Magi modifier. This causes one of the generators for the Twilight Archmage to be active when you first get in, which saves a bit of time. That's about it for dungeon modifiers. There was one other nice quality of life change that was implemented alongside the update, the ability to call dungeons in a realm. Gone are the days of people trolling calling Candyland TP while just sitting on the beach or something, as you can now click a dungeon portal to call it out in chat, though it only works if no one has entered the dungeon yet. If someone has entered the dungeon, you would have to call it out the same way that you did previously. If you see a dungeon called out in chat, you can just control-click and chat to teleport to the player that called it. It doesn't TP you to the portal, so if that person moved away, you might have to look around. It's also possible that they call it and go in immediately, which keeps you from being able to TP to them in the first place, which can be pretty frustrating. If you're going to call out a dungeon, you should at least wait a few seconds to give people time to TP. Ideally, Deca would link the call to the portal rather than the player, but this would probably be tougher to code and could lead to some potential abuse.